The summer heat in Yuzurifu was a heavy, suffocating blanket, thick with the scent of damp earth, pine needles, and the electric hum of cicadas screaming from the canopy. The sun beat down on the pavement, creating rippling mirages that made the suburban streets look like they were melting. But down by the riverbank, sheltered by the sprawling branches of ancient willow trees, it was a different world. It was a world of exploration, of scraped knees, of imaginary villains and the righteous heroes destined to defeat them. Izuku Midoriya was 4 years old, a tiny, freckled boy with a wild mop of unruly green hair that seemed to defy both gravity and his mother's attempts to comb it. He was currently panting, his small chest heaving as he scurried to keep up with the undisputed leader of their neighborhood expedition, Katsuki Bakugo. Katsuki was everything Izuku admired. He was loud, he was fearless, and he marched through the tall grass with the arrogant stride of a conqueror. Katsuki hadn't manifested his quirk yet, but no one doubted it would be spectacular. Everything about Katsuki was spectacular. "Hurry up, Deku!" Katsuki shouted over his shoulder, swatting aside a low-hanging willow branch with a sturdy wooden stick he had claimed as his hero's sword. "The villain's base is just across the water. If you keep dragging your feet, All Might's gonna leave you behind." "I'm coming, Kaken!" Izuku squeaked, adjusting the bright yellow strap of his bug-catching net. He scrambled over a mossy rock, his bright red sneakers slipping slightly on the damp stone. The villain's base was, in reality, a small, rocky island in the middle of the shallow river, accessible only by navigating a precarious bridge made from a fallen, rotting log. For a 4-year-old, the log looked as wide as a mountain pass and as treacherous as a tightrope over a volcano. The water rushed beneath it, frothing white against the jagged stones. Katsuki didn't hesitate. He leapt onto the log, his arms thrown out to the sides for balance, his wooden sword pointed triumphantly toward the sky. "Forward march!" he commanded, taking confident, rapid steps across the slick, algae-covered bark. 2 other boys from their neighborhood followed suit, though with considerably less grace, shimmying across the log while clinging to each other. Izuku stood at the edge, swallowing hard. The water looked fast. The log looked slippery. "Kaken, maybe we should find a shallower place to cross?" Izuku called out, his voice trembling just a fraction. Katsuki paused halfway across, turning to shoot Izuku a look of pure, unadulterated disdain. "Are you scared, Deku? Heroes don't get scared of a little water. Stay there if you're a baby." He turned sharply on his heel to continue his march, and that was when his foot found a patch of wet, decaying moss. It happened in slow motion. Izuku watched as Katsuki's confident posture suddenly broke. His arms flailed wildly, the wooden stick flying from his grasp and tumbling into the rushing water. Katsuki's face contorted from arrogance to shock, his crimson eyes widening. "Kaken!" Izuku screamed. Katsuki slipped. He fell hard, his body twisting awkwardly. He missed the deep water, instead crashing down onto the shallow, jagged river rocks jutting out near the bank. A sharp crack echoed over the sound of the river, followed by a sickening thud. The other boys on the log froze, terrified. Izuku didn't think. He didn't weigh the danger or consider his own clumsiness. His legs moved on pure, primal instinct. He scrambled down the muddy embankment, slipping and sliding, mud coating his shorts and scraping his own elbows, until he reached the water's edge where Katsuki lay. Katsuki was curled in on himself, clutching his right knee. He wasn't crying. Katsuki's pride would never allow that. But his breath was coming in sharp, ragged hisses, and his face was terrifyingly pale. "Kaken! Are you okay?" Izuku dropped to his knees in the shallow water, soaking his shorts and shoes. He leaned over his friend. Katsuki's pants were torn, and beneath the fabric, the skin was a mess of torn flesh, dirt, and rapidly welling blood. A jagged rock had sliced deep into the side of his knee, leaving a gruesome, open gash. The blood was mixing with the river water, swirling into pink clouds around their ankles. Don't touch it, you idiot!" Katsuki hissed through gritted teeth, swatting blindly at Izuku. "It hurts. Just go get my mom. You're bleeding a lot." Izuku panicked, tears welling in his large, emerald eyes. His hands hovered over the wound, trembling violently. He didn't know what to do. He didn't have a bandage. He didn't have anything. All he had was this overwhelming, desperate desire for Katsuki to stop hurting. Please, he thought, squeezing his eyes shut. Please stop bleeding. Please be okay. Without realizing it, Izuku pressed his small, bare hands directly over the bleeding gash on Katsuki's knee. I said don't touch. Katsuki began to yell, but the words died in his throat. The moment Izuku's skin made contact with Katsuki's torn flesh, a sensation unlike anything Izuku had ever felt rushed through him. It wasn't magic, it felt like waking up. It felt like opening his eyes in a dark room and suddenly seeing the blueprint of the universe. Information flooded Izuku's 4-year-old brain, not in words, but in sensory concepts. He felt the jagged edges of torn epithelial tissue, he felt the ruptured capillaries, the frantic pulse of blood trying to escape, the microscopic dirt particles lodged in the exposed dermis. He could feel the building blocks of Katsuki's leg, and deep within Izuku's chest, a dormant engine roared to life. A brilliant, blinding golden light erupted from beneath Izuku's palms. It was so bright that the other boys on the log shielded their eyes, crying out in alarm. Katsuki gasped, his crimson eyes wide, staring at Izuku's hands. There was no heat. There was no pain. Instead, Katsuki felt a strange, cool tingling sensation, like a million tiny ants marching across his skin in perfect unison. Izuku didn't know what he was doing, yet he knew exactly what to do. Driven by the instinct of his newly awakened quirk, he willed the dirt to be expelled. He willed the torn blood vessels to stitch themselves shut. He commanded the skin cells to multiply, to weave back together, to return to the state they were in before the fall. It took less than 3 seconds. The golden light faded, leaving behind the dappled shade of the willow tree and the babbling of the river. Izuku sat back on his heels, gasping for air as if he had just run a marathon. His head spun dizzily, a sharp ache pulsing behind his eyes. He looked down at his hands. They were clean. There wasn't a single drop of blood on them. Katsuki slowly pulled himself up into a sitting position, his mouth hanging open. He looked down at his right leg. The pant leg was still torn, stained with mud and the remnants of blood, but the skin underneath, it was flawless. There was no cut. There was no scab. There wasn't even a scar. The skin was smooth, pale, and completely intact, as if the jagged rock had never touched him. What? Katsuki whispered, his voice trembling. He prodded his knee with a muddy finger. He felt no pain. He looked up at Izuku, his expression a complicated mix of awe, confusion, and a sudden, uncharacteristic wariness. Deku, what did you do? I don't know, Izuku stammered, staring at his palms. They felt warm, humming with a residual, electric energy. The world around him felt different. When he looked at the mud, he didn't just see mud. He vaguely felt the moisture, the minerals, the decaying organic matter. Distracted and overwhelmed, Izuku shifted his weight, pressing his right hand down onto a smooth, gray river stone beside him to steady himself. As soon as his palm touched the rock, that same golden light flashed again, though briefer this time. Izuku felt a sudden rush of information, silicon, oxygen, tightly packed atoms. He felt a subconscious desire for clarity, for the opaque to become clear. A soft chink sound echoed. Katsuki recoiled, shuffling backward in the water. Izuku lifted his hand. The gray river stone was gone. In its place, perfectly molded into the exact same shape and size as the original rock, was a piece of solid, flawlessly transparent glass. The sunlight caught the edges of the glass stone, refracting a tiny rainbow across Katsuki's shocked face. You! Katsuki breathed out, staring at the glass stone, then at his perfectly healed knee, and finally at the small, trembling green-haired boy in front of him. You got your quirk. Izuku picked up the glass stone. It was smooth, cool, and heavy. He could see his own wide, terrified eye reflected in its surface. He had fixed Katsuki. He had changed a rock into glass. He had a quirk. But as the adrenaline faded, the throbbing in Izuku's head intensified into a splitting migraine. The sheer mental calculation required to stitch human DNA back together, even subconsciously, was too much for his undeveloped brain. His vision blurred, the edges of the world turning black. Kaken! Izuku mumbled, dropping the glass stone back into the water with a soft splash. My head hurts. Izuku swayed, his eyes rolling back, and he collapsed forward into the shallow river, unconscious before his face hit the water. When Izuku woke up, he was no longer smelling damp earth and river water. He smelled the sterile, sharp scent of antiseptic. The soft hum of an air conditioner replaced the cicadas. He blinked his eyes open slowly, wincing at the harsh, fluorescent lights overhead. He was lying on a crisp paper sheet over a padded examination table. Izuku! Oh, my baby! A warm, familiar weight threw itself around him. Inko Midoriya was weeping freely, her tears soaking into the shoulder of Izuku's small, hospital-issued gown. Her green hair, so much like his own, tickled his cheek. Mom? Izuku rasped, his throat dry. You're awake! The doctor said you just fainted from quirk exhaustion, but I was so worried. Katsuki's mother called me. They carried you all the way back. Inko pulled back, her hands framing Izuku's face, checking him for any hidden injuries. Are you okay? Does anything hurt? I'm okay, Izuku said softly. The migraine was gone, replaced by a dull, lingering lethargy. He looked down at his hands. They looked entirely normal. Short fingers, slightly chubby, undeniably human. Mom, I used my quirk. Inko's face softened, a teary smile breaking through her worry. I know, sweetheart. Mitsuki told me what Katsuki said. He said you healed him. And you made this. Inko reached into her purse and pulled out the glass river stone. It was perfectly clear, devoid of any bubbles or imperfections. Before Izuku could respond, the door to the examination room clicked open. A tall man walked in, wearing a pristine white coat over a sharp suit. He had a weary face lined with years of intense study, and a pair of spectacles perched on the bridge of his nose. He carried a thick digital tablet, which he was currently tapping with a stylus. Ah, the young man is awake, the doctor said, offering a professional, tight-lipped smile. I am Dr. Tsubasa. I specialize in quirk counseling and diagnostics here at the Central Hospital. Doctor, is he truly all right? Inko asked, her hands nervously twisting the strap of her purse. Physically, he is perfectly fine, Mrs. Midoriya, Dr. Tsubasa said, stepping up to the examination table. He looked down at Izuku with an expression that Izuku couldn't quite read. It wasn't the warm, encouraging look adults usually gave children. It was a look of intense, clinical fascination. It made Izuku want to shrink back against the wall. I have spent the last 3 hours analyzing the blood work, the quirk factor X-rays, and the artifact your son created, the doctor continued, gesturing to the glass stone. To be frank, Mrs. Midoriya, in my 20 years of quirk analysis, I have never seen a manifestation quite like this. Most quirks are straightforward. They emit elements, they alter the user's body, or they affect objects in rudimentary ways. Izuku's quirk. Dr. Tsubasa paused, pulling a wooden tongue depressor from a jar on the counter. He held it out to Izuku. Izuku, can you do to this stick what you did to that rock? Izuku looked at the wood, then up at his mother. Inko nodded encouragingly. Slowly, Izuku reached out. He pinched one end of the wooden stick between his thumb and forefinger. Instantly, the humming returned. The world zoomed in. Izuku felt the cellulose, the lignin, the moisture content, the carbon chains. But wood was alive, once. It was infinitely more complex than a rock. The amount of information flooding his brain was staggering, threatening to bring back the migraine. It's too much, Izuku whimpered, his eyes screwing shut as he tried to process the molecular structure of the wood. It's noisy. Don't try to understand all of it, Dr. Tsubasa instructed, his voice low and urgent. Just focus on the carbon. Focus on the core element, and think of something simple. Think of the metal of a coin. Izuku swallowed hard. He focused, pushing past the overwhelming static of the wood's organic complexity. He found the carbon. He imagined the shiny, hard surface of a 100-yen coin. He willed the bonds to break, to shift, to restructure. Golden light flared from his fingertips. It crawled up the tongue depressor like a slow-moving flame. Where the light touched, the rough grain of the wood vanished, replaced by smooth, gleaming, silvery metal. The transformation took about 10 seconds, ending right before the metal reached the doctor's fingers. The doctor dropped the object onto a metal tray. It landed with a heavy, metallic clatter that echoed loudly in the small room. It was no longer wood. It was a solid bar of steel. Inko gasped, covering her mouth. Izuku slumped back, panting heavily, rubbing his temples. Dr. Tsubasa stared at the steel bar for a long time before turning back to Inko. The clinical fascination in his eyes had hardened into something far more serious. "Mrs. Midoriya, I need to speak with you outside for a moment," the doctor said quietly. "Can't you tell me here?" Inko asked, sensing the shift in the doctor's tone. "I would prefer to discuss the implications of his diagnosis in the hall," Dr. Tsubasa insisted gently. Inko looked at Izuku, patted his knee reassuringly, and followed the doctor out, pulling the door shut behind her. But the door didn't click completely shut. It remained open just a crack. Izuku, still reeling from the metallic taste in his mouth and the ache in his head, slid off the examination table. His bare feet patted softly against the cold linoleum floor. Driven by a childhood curiosity he would soon come to regret, he crept toward the door and pressed his ear to the crack. "Officially classified as an emitter type, but that hardly does it justice," Dr. Tsubasa's muffled voice came through. "Based on the cellular regeneration of the Bakugo boy and the atomic transmutation of the rock and the wood, Izuku possesses a quirk that allows for the localized, flawless manipulation of matter at a molecular and quantum level. I don't understand," Inko's voice trembled. "He can heal people? Like Recovery Girl?" "Far beyond Recovery Girl," the doctor replied, and the gravity in his voice made Izuku's chest tighten. "Recovery Girl uses the patient's own stamina to accelerate their natural healing process. If the patient is too weak, they die. Izuku does not use the patient's stamina. He uses his own mental calculation to manually restructure damaged cells, essentially bypassing the body's natural limits. He didn't just heal that boy's knee. He unmade the wound and rebuilt the flesh perfectly. That's wonderful. He's always wanted to be a hero, doctor. He can save so many people." "You aren't grasping the terrifying scope of this, Mrs. Midoriya." The harshness of the doctor's words made Izuku flinch. "I am registering this quirk under the name Synthesis," the doctor continued, his tone dropping to a grim whisper. "But you must understand what this means. The fundamental law of alchemy and molecular biology is equivalent exchange, and the understanding of bonds. To build, one must know how things are built. To heal a person, Izuku's quirk subconsciously reads the blueprint of human anatomy and rewrites it." A heavy pause hung in the hallway. "Mrs. Midoriya, if your son can rewrite the blueprint of a human being to fix a cut, what happens if he sneezes while touching someone, and accidentally rewrites their heart into a block of glass?" A sharp gasp echoed from the hallway. Izuku heard his mother stumble backward, her back hitting the wall. "No. He would never. He's a gentle boy. He is a 4-year-old child with the power of a god in his hands," Dr. Tsubasa stated coldly. "Right now, his quirk operates on instinct, and it causes him intense physical pain in the form of migraines because his brain cannot process the data he is receiving. But as he grows, as his brain develops, Mrs. Midoriya, I have seen villains with quirks that can decay matter or explode it. Those are blunt instruments. What Izuku has is a scalpel that can sever the very fabric of reality." Tears stung Izuku's eyes. He looked down at his small hands. They were trembling violently now. "He could turn air into poison gas," the doctor continued relentlessly. "He could touch a villain and turn their blood into lead. He could deconstruct a human being atom by atom and leave nothing but a stain on the pavement. And he could do it painlessly, instantly, with a single touch." "Stop!" Inko sobbed quietly. "Please stop. He wants to be a hero. He loves All Might. And he can be a hero," the doctor softened slightly. "He could be the greatest hero this world has ever seen. But only if he is disciplined. Only if he is perfectly, absolutely controlled. You cannot let him treat this quirk like a toy. He must study. He must understand chemistry, biology, physics. If he touches things without understanding what he is doing, the results could be catastrophic. You must make him understand the weight of what he carries." Izuku backed away from the door. His breath itched in his throat, coming in short, panicked gasps. He looked at his hands. The power of a god. Turn a heart into glass. Deconstruct a human being. He remembered the golden light. He remembered how easy it was to change the rock. It was as easy as breathing. How easy would it be to accidentally unmake someone? How easy would it be to reach out to hold his mother's hand and turn her into dust? When Inko re-entered the room, her eyes were red-rimmed and puffy, though she plastered a brave, watery smile on her face. She expected to see her son sitting on the table, perhaps playing with the newly made steel bar. Instead, Izuku was huddled in the farthest corner of the room, his knees pulled tightly to his chest. His hands were tucked deep into his armpits, hidden away, as if he were terrified of them. Izuku? Sweetheart? Inko approached slowly, reaching out. Don't touch me! Izuku shrieked, pressing himself harder against the wall. Tears streamed down his freckled cheeks. Mom, please! Don't touch my hands! I don't want to hurt you! Inko's heart broke. She realized he had heard everything. She didn't hesitate. She dropped to her knees, wrapped her arms around her trembling son, and pulled him to her chest. Izuku squeezed his eyes shut, keeping his hands stubbornly balled into fists and tucked against his own ribs, refusing to let his palms make contact with her. It's okay, Izuku, she whispered into his wild green hair, crying with him. You're not a monster. You're my beautiful boy. And you're going to save so many people. Izuku cried until his voice went hoarse. He didn't feel like a hero. He felt like a bomb waiting to go off. The manifestation of Quirk brought a profound shift in Izuku Midoriya's life, altering the trajectory of his childhood in ways neither he nor his mother could have anticipated. In the original timeline of a different universe, a quirkless Izuku would have been mocked, beaten, and ground down by a society that valued power above all else. He would have become a nervous, shrinking violet, clinging desperately to a dream that everyone told him was impossible, bullied relentlessly by the very boy he looked up to. But this Izuku was not quirkless. Izuku possessed synthesis. And even at the age of 5, when he returned to kindergarten, word of what he had done at the riverbank had spread among the children and the teachers alike. No one bullied Izuku Midoriya. How could they? The teachers watched him with a mix of awe and underlying terror. The other children gave him a wide berth, whispering about the boy who could turn sticks into swords and heal any scrape instantly. But Izuku didn't want their fear. He just wanted to be normal. He wanted to play heroes and villains, to chase bugs, to be a kid. But the doctor's words echoed in his mind every waking hour, accidentally rewrite their heart into a block of glass. To cope with the terrifying potential of his own hands, Izuku developed a set of rigid, self-imposed rules. First, he demanded gloves. Inko had obliged, buying him dozens of pairs of soft, white cotton gloves. Izuku never took them off in public. He wore them at school, at the park, even at the dinner table until Inko gently coaxed him into removing them to eat. The gloves served as a physical and psychological barrier. His quirk could work through thin materials if he forced it, but the cotton dampened the automatic sensory feedback he received from touching objects, keeping the overwhelming flood of molecular data at bay. Second, he stopped playing recklessly. He never roughhoused. He never pushed, shoved, or tagged anyone. If a ball was thrown to him, he caught it with his forearms or dodged it entirely. He became a quiet, incredibly observant child, always standing on the periphery, watching everything with large, calculating green eyes. Third, and most importantly, he began to study. If he had to understand what he was touching to keep everyone safe, then he would learn everything there was to know about the world. At age 6, while other kids were learning basic kanji and reading comic books, Izuku begged his mother for encyclopedias. His famous notebooks, which would have originally been filled with mere observations of pro heroes' moves and costumes, evolved into something much denser and far more complex. Hero analysis for the future #1 was less about All Might's smash techniques and more about the tensile strength of the concrete All Might broke. Izuku filled pages with childish handwriting that gradually morphed into precise, cramped text, detailing the chemical composition of asphalt, the melting point of steel, the cellular structure of human epidermis, and the exact mineral makeup of the earth beneath Mizurufu. He checked out books on human anatomy from the public library. He studied the circulatory system, tracing the veins on the diagrams with a gloved finger, memorizing how blood flowed, how oxygen was carried, how skin regenerated. He was a prodigy born out of absolute terror. He learned chemistry not out of passion, but out of a desperate need to not accidentally kill someone. And then, There was Katsuki Bakugo. Katsuki's quirk, explosion, manifested violently and brilliantly a few months after Izuku's awakening. Katsuki could sweat nitroglycerin and detonate it at will. It was flashy, it was lethal, and it was the perfect quirk for a limelight hero. The praise rained down on Katsuki, inflating his already massive ego into a towering monument of pride. Katsuki became the undisputed king of the playground. He was loud, aggressive, and demanded subordination from everyone around him. Everyone except Izuku. The dynamic between the two boys was incredibly complex, a fragile balance of mutual respect, underlying fear, and intense rivalry. Katsuki could not bully Izuku. It wasn't just that Izuku's quirk was fundamentally more powerful. It was that Katsuki vividly remembered the sensation of his torn flesh stitching itself together, and the chilling chink of a rock turning into glass. Katsuki knew, deep down in his fiery soul, that if Izuku wanted to, he could reach out, touch his arm, and turn his nitroglycerin sweat into inert water, or worse, turn his bones to dust. But Izuku never did. Izuku was terrified of his own shadow, always wearing those stupid white gloves, always muttering under his breath about molecules and atoms, always looking at Katsuki with those wide, admiring eyes. It drove Katsuki insane. One afternoon, when they were 8 years old, the tension boiled over on a local playground. Katsuki was showing off, using small explosions in his palms to propel himself higher on the swing set. The other kids cheered as he rocketed upward, laughing triumphantly. But on his descent, he landed too hard on the rusted metal seat of an older, broken swing. The chain, brittle from years of rain and neglect, snapped under the force. Katsuki tumbled into the sand, scraping his palms and bruising his pride. The kids gasped, stepping back. Katsuki scrambled up, his face flushed red with anger and embarrassment. He kicked the broken swing set, letting off a spark that singed the sand. "Stupid junk!" Katsuki yelled. From the edge of the sandbox, Izuku quietly approached. He was wearing a plain yellow t-shirt, green shorts, and his ever-present white gloves. He knelt down beside the broken chain lying in the sand. "Don't look at me, Deku!" Katsuki snapped, baring his teeth. "I didn't need your help. I fell on purpose." Izuku didn't say anything. He just looked at the rusted, broken link of the chain. He reached out and, using his teeth, pulled the white glove off his right hand. Katsuki went completely still. The other kids on the playground hushed, watching with wide eyes. It was a rare event for Midoriya to take off his gloves. Izuku placed his bare, pale hand against the rusted iron chain. He closed his eyes. Iron oxide, Izuku thought, the familiar hum returning to his mind. Fe2O3. It's oxidized. The bonds are weak. I need to strip the oxygen atoms. I need to reintroduce carbon for tensile strength. I need to make it steel. Golden light bloomed from beneath Izuku's small hand. It wasn't a flash this time. It was a steady, controlled glow that traveled up the length of the chain. The flaky, orange rust seemingly dissolved into thin air. The pitted, weakened iron smoothed out, darkening into a brilliant, polished silver. The broken link twisted back on itself, melting and fusing seamlessly until the chain was whole again, gleaming like a brand new broadsword. Izuku exhaled a slow breath, opening his eyes. He picked up the swing seat and reattached it, the metal bending to his will like soft clay before hardening instantly into high-carbon steel. He slipped his white glove back on, hiding his hand away. He stood up and looked at Katsuki. "It's fixed, Kaken. You can swing again." Katsuki stared at the gleaming steel chain, then at Izuku. His fists clenched, small pops of caramel-scented explosions crackling in his palms. His pride was a wounded animal, backed into a corner by the sheer, terrifying utility of Izuku's power. "You think you're better than me, Deku?" Katsuki growled, stepping into Izuku's personal space. The smell of burnt sugar and ozone was heavy in the air. "You think because you can fix a stupid chain, or heal a scrape, that makes you a hero?" Izuku didn't flinch, though his heart hammered in his chest. "No, Kaken. I just wanted to fix it." "Your quirk is creepy," Katsuki sneered, though there was a tremor in his voice. "It's not a hero's quirk. Heroes smash villains. Heroes blow things up. You're just a glorified doctor." You're too scared to even take your gloves off most of the time. I have to be careful, Izuku said, his voice quiet but incredibly firm. It lacked the stuttering uncertainty that might have plagued him in another life. He had spent 4 years staring into the microscopic abyss of matter. He knew exactly what he was capable of. If I'm not careful, Kaken, I could hurt someone. Really badly. Katsuki grabbed the front of Izuku's shirt, pulling him close. The heat radiating from Katsuki's hands was intense. Listen to me, you damn nerd. I don't care what you can turn into glass or steel. I'm going to be the #1 hero. I'm going to surpass All Might. And I'm going to prove that my explosions are better than your weird science tricks. You hear me? We're rivals. Izuku looked into Katsuki's fierce, crimson eyes. He saw the challenge, the insecurity, and the burning drive. Katsuki wasn't pushing him down. Katsuki was challenging him to rise up. Katsuki was the only person in the world who looked at Izuku's power and decided to fight it instead of fear it. A small, determined smile touched the corner of Izuku's mouth. Okay, Kaken. We're rivals. But I'm going to be a hero too. A hero who saves everyone, no matter what. Katsuki shoved him back, scoffing loudly before turning on his heel and storming off across the playground, leaving the other children whispering in his wake. Izuku watched him go, adjusting the cuff of his white glove. He turned and looked at the swing set. The entire left chain was now made of weapons-grade, pristine steel, shining brilliantly in the afternoon sun, completely mismatched with the rusted, peeling paint of the rest of the structure. He had a long way to go. His control was getting better, but the headache still came if he transmuted too much mass at once. He needed to understand molecular biology better. He needed to understand how to affect things without direct skin contact, maybe through conductive materials. He needed to be perfect, because when you possess the power to reshape the world, a single mistake could mean unmaking it entirely. Years bled into one another, carrying the boys from the simplicity of elementary school into the grueling, hormone-fueled crucible of Aldera Junior High. The world changed, heroes rose and fell, but in the Midoriya household, the routine remained absolute. Izuku's bedroom looked less like a teenager's sanctuary and more like a university professor's study. The posters of All Might still adorned the walls, a testament to his enduring dream, but they were vastly outnumbered by the towering stacks of literature. Textbooks on advanced cellular biology, organic chemistry, metallurgy, thermodynamics, and quantum mechanics covered his desk. A periodic table of elements hung on the ceiling above his bed, ensuring it was the last thing he saw before sleep and the first thing he saw upon waking. Izuku sat at his desk, the pale glow of his desk lamp casting long shadows across his face. He was 14 years old now. He had grown out of his childhood chub, his frame leaning out, heavily corded with the wiry muscle of a boy who jogged every morning just to clear his perpetually racing mind. His green hair was still a wild, untamable mess. He was staring at his bare hands. The gloves lay discarded on the textbook in front of him. His hands were calloused from writing and exercising, scarred slightly from instances where he had pushed his quirk too far, and the localized energy had blistered his own skin. He flexed his fingers. He could feel it. The ambient hum of reality. Even without touching anything, the proximity of the air itself whispered to him. Nitrogen. Oxygen. Argon. Carbon dioxide. He could feel the moisture and the humidity. He could feel the dust motes dancing in the lamplight. Synthesis. It was a beautiful, terrifying thing. Over the past decade, he had pushed the boundaries of his quirk in secret. He had learned that he didn't necessarily need to touch the exact object he wanted to change, so long as there was a contiguous solid or liquid medium. If he touched a concrete wall, he could alter the composition of the concrete 3 feet away, rippling the effect through the material like a shockwave. He had learned he could alter states of matter, flash freezing water by stripping its kinetic energy and restructuring the hydrogen bonds, or boiling it instantly by doing the reverse. But his greatest, most secretive focus remained on biology. Under the cover of night, in his room, he had practiced on himself. He had learned how to perfectly mend a paper cut the moment it happened. When he had accidentally broken his toe stubbing it against his desk, he had sat on the floor, gritted his teeth against the searing migraine, and forced the calcium and marrow to knit back together flawlessly. He knew the human body better than most surgeons, He knew the exact thickness of the myelin sheath around a nerve, the precise viscosity of synovial fluid in a joint. He was ready. Tomorrow was the last year of middle school. In exactly 10 months, the UA high school entrance exams would begin. Izuku closed his hand into a fist. The air around his knuckles warped slightly, a faint, almost invisible golden haze illuminating the space between his fingers as he subconsciously forced the nitrogen molecules in the air to densely pack together, forming a temporary, invisible shield of solidified gas before letting it dissipate. He reached down and pulled the white cotton gloves back onto his hands, securing them tightly. The world went quiet again. The overwhelming noise of the atomic universe faded back into a manageable hum. He looked up at the poster of All Might, posing triumphantly with his signature bright smile, the word, "I am here!" emblazoned in bold red letters across the bottom. "I'm going to UA," Izuku whispered to the empty room, his voice steady, devoid of the crippling doubt that haunted alternate versions of himself. "I'm not going to be a villain. I'm not going to be a monster. I am going to master this. I will hold the world together, and I will be a hero who saves everyone with a smile." Outside his window, the city of Muzidafu slept, completely unaware of the boy in the small apartment who held the blueprint of their reality in the palms of his gloved hands. The boy who could deconstruct a mountain, or knit a shattered heart. The boy who was about to reshape everything. The chalk scraped against the blackboard, a sharp, rhythmic sound that cut through the stifling afternoon heat of the Aldera Junior High classroom. To the average student, the sound was merely an annoyance, a reminder that the school day was dragging on into its final, agonizing hour. But to 14-year-old Izuku Midoriya, sitting quietly in the middle row near the window, the sound was a cascade of sensory data. Even through his crisp, white cotton gloves, Izuku could feel the ambient resonance of the room. He could sense the calcium carbonate of the chalk turning into fine, airborne dust. He could feel the humidity in the air, the trace amounts of carbon dioxide exhaled by his 30 classmates, the synthetic polymers of the cheap desk he was leaning against. The world was a constant, buzzing symphony of molecular information, a noisy radio station he could never fully turn off, only turn down. Izuku blinked, tearing his eyes away from the blackboard to look down at the heavy, leather-bound textbook resting open on his desk. It wasn't a middle school textbook. It was a university-level volume on advanced proteomics and cellular regeneration. The pages were filled with complex diagrams of folded proteins, RNA sequences, and the chemical structures of human enzymes. The margins of the book were entirely blackened with Izuku's own cramped, meticulous notes, cross-referencing the text with his own theories on quantum restructuring. He was currently calculating the exact amount of localized energy required to sever a carbon-carbon bond in a lipid molecule without generating excess thermal radiation. It was a delicate equation. If he miscalculated while using his quirk on a living subject, the thermal backlash could boil the water in a person's cells, effectively cooking them from the inside out. Izuku swallowed hard, a faint sheen of sweat forming on his brow, and adjusted his white gloves. He had to be perfect. There was no room for error. So, the homeroom teacher drawled, tapping a stack of papers against his podium, breaking Izuku's concentration. As third-year students, it's time to start thinking seriously about your futures. I'm going to pass out printouts for your desired career paths. The teacher paused, a wry smirk spreading across his face. He tossed the stack of papers into the air. But who am I kidding? You're all planning on entering the hero course, aren't you? The classroom erupted. Quirks flared to life in a chaotic display of light, sound, and minor mutations. A boy in the front stretched his neck like a rubber band. A girl in the back shot small jets of water from her fingertips. It was a cacophony of teenage excitement and raw, unpolished power. Yes, you all have wonderful quirks, the teacher sighed, waving a hand to settle them down. But remember, using your quirks on school grounds is against the rules. Sensei. Don't lump me in with these background characters. The arrogant, explosive voice belonged to Katsuki Bakugo. He was leaning back in his chair, his feet propped up on his desk in blatant defiance of school rules, a cocky grin plastered across his face. Small, warning sparks of crimson and gold crackled in the palms of his hands, carrying the distinct, sweet and sour scent of burnt caramel and ozone. The class groaned, a mix of genuine annoyance and ingrained intimidation. I'm not going to be stuck at the bottom of the barrel with these losers, Katsuki declared, his red eyes sweeping over the room with absolute disdain. I scored a perfect mock test. I'm the only one here who has the stuff to get into UA High School. I'm going to surpass All Might and become the top hero, and my name will be carved into the highest tax bracket. Ah, yes, Bakugo, the teacher hummed, looking at his clipboard. You are applying for UA. Your grades are certainly exceptional, Katsuki scoffed, a confident smirk on his face. He thrived on this. He lived for the validation that he was the apex predator in this small, suburban pond. Oh, right, the teacher added, pushing his glasses up his nose, his eyes flicking toward the middle row. Midoriya. You're also applying for the UA Hero course, aren't you? The classroom, which had been buzzing with murmurs of Katsuki's arrogance, suddenly went completely, dead silent. It wasn't a silence of mockery. In the original timeline, this would have been the moment the class erupted into cruel, tearing laughter, throwing paper and insults at the quirkless boy who dared to dream. But this timeline was different. The silence that fell over the Aldera third years was heavy, thick with a palpable, underlying tension. Every head turned slowly to look at Izuku. Izuku didn't flinch. He didn't stutter, and he didn't shrink down into his seat. He simply looked up from his textbook on proteomics, his large, emerald-green eyes calm and calculating. He met the gazes of his classmates, one by one. A boy who could stretch his fingers quickly pulled them back, looking away. A girl who could emit minor sonic waves swallowed hard and busied herself with her pencil case. They remembered the rumors. They remembered the time in first year when a stray baseball had shattered a window, sending a jagged shard of glass flying toward a girl's face. Izuku hadn't even blinked. He had just raised a gloved hand, and the glass shard had instantly turned into a flurry of soft, harmless dandelion seeds before it could cut her. They knew Izuku Midoriya was not normal. They didn't know the exact nature of his quirk. Izuku kept it a closely guarded secret, referring to it simply as matter manipulation on official forms. But they knew it was absolute, godlike, and terrifyingly silent. Katsuki Bakugo froze, his feet slowly lowering from his desk. The sparks in his hands died out. He turned his head slowly, his crimson eyes locking onto Izuku's green ones. The familiar, burning rage ignited in Katsuki's chest, a complex mixture of superiority and an incredibly deeply buried, defensive terror. Deku, Katsuki growled, the word lacking its usual mocking lilt, replaced instead by a dangerous, low warning. Yes, sensei, Izuku answered the teacher, his voice polite, steady, and entirely ignoring Katsuki's glare. I am applying for UA. He didn't elaborate. He didn't need to. He simply looked back down at his textbook, reached for his mechanical pencil, and continued calculating the thermal limits of cellular regeneration. The bell rang shortly after, shattering the heavy silence. The students packed their bags with a hurried, nervous energy, eager to escape the oppressive atmosphere of the room. Izuku took his time, carefully closing his thick textbooks and sliding them into his reinforced yellow backpack. As he slung the heavy bag over his shoulder, a shadow fell over his desk. Katsuki stood there, flanked by two of his lackeys. The lackeys looked nervous, hovering a few feet back, entirely unwilling to get within arm's reach of Izuku. Katsuki, however, slammed his palm down onto Izuku's wooden desk. The heat from his hand instantly scorched the varnish, leaving a blackened, smoking handprint. Listen to me, you damn nerd, Katsuki hissed, leaning in so close Izuku could smell the nitroglycerin on his breath. I don't care what kind of freaky alchemy you've been practicing in your room. UA is my stage. The hero course is for people who fight, for people who have the guts to put their lives on the line. Not for a lab rat who's too scared to take off his gloves. Izuku looked calmly at the smoldering handprint on his desk. He could feel the residual heat, the agitated carbon molecules. Heroics isn't just about destroying things, Kaken, Izuku said softly, his voice even. It's about saving people. And you can't save everyone with an explosion. Katsuki's jaw clenched, a vein pulsing in his temple. If a villain is dead, the people are saved. You think you can just magically wave your hands and fix everything? What happens when a villain is faster than you? What happens when you can't just touch a wall and hide behind it? I've been preparing, Izuku replied simply, meeting Katsuki's burning gaze. I'm not going to hide, Katsuki sneered, pushing off the desk. We'll see, Deku. The entrance exam isn't a written test. They're going to make us fight. And when they do, your fancy science tricks won't mean a damn thing if you don't have the killer instinct. Stay out of my way. Katsuki spun on his heel, his lackeys scrambling to follow him out the door. Izuku watched them leave. He sighed, a heavy, tired sound that seemed entirely too old for a 14-year-old boy. He looked down at his desk. With a slow, deliberate movement, he pressed his gloved index finger against the blackened, scorched wood of Katsuki's handprint. He didn't take off the glove. He just focused his mind, pushing his intent through the thin cotton. Carbon. Lignin. Realign the molecular structure. Remove the thermal agitation. A faint, almost imperceptible golden glow emanated from beneath his finger. In a fraction of a second, the scorched, blackened wood smoothed over, the deep burn vanishing seamlessly until the desk looked completely pristine, matching the exact grain and color of the surrounding wood. Izuku turned and walked out of the classroom. The walk home from Aldera Junior High was usually a time for Izuku to decompress. He lived in the densely populated suburbs of Muzidafu, a sprawling metropolis that was a chaotic blend of modern skyscrapers, winding residential streets, and older, industrial districts. Izuku had a specific route he walked every day. It wasn't the shortest route, but it was the one that provided the best environmental training for his quirk. As he walked, Izuku practiced his sensory mapping. It was an exhausting mental exercise, one that often left him with mild migraines by the time he reached his apartment, but it was absolutely vital for his control. He kept his eyes forward, but he extended his awareness outward in a 10-meter radius. He felt the asphalt beneath his red sneakers. He mapped the exact depth of the concrete, feeling where the soil began, where the roots of the roadside cherry blossom trees tangled with the municipal water pipes. He sensed the rust forming on a street lamp, the copper wiring pulsing with electricity inside the pole. He felt the chemical composition of the air, mapping the pockets of exhaust fumes from passing cars. He was a walking MRI machine for the physical world. He approached a large, concrete underpass, a shortcut that would shave 10 minutes off his walk. The tunnel was dark, echoing with the sound of dripping water from a municipal runoff grate. Izuku paused at the entrance. He closed his eyes and extended his sensory map into the tunnel. Concrete. Rebar. Stagnant water. Moss. And then, something else. Izuku's eyes snapped open, his breath catching in his throat. The sensory feedback he was receiving from the middle of the tunnel was entirely wrong. It wasn't concrete, and it wasn't just dirty water. It was a massive, shifting amalgamation of complex, highly volatile organic compounds. It felt like liquid, but it possessed a dense, chaotic cellular structure. It was rich in methane, ammonia, and incredibly corrosive acidic enzymes. And it was alive. A mutant-type quirk, Izuku deduced instantly, his analytical mind going into overdrive. Fluid-based body. Highly toxic. It's hiding in the sewer runoff, waiting. If someone walks in there, it will likely attempt to asphyxiate them or dissolve their organic tissues to hijack their body. Izuku took a slow, deliberate step back from the underpass. He could fight it. He knew he could. He could take his gloves off, place his hands on the concrete wall of the tunnel, and send a transmutational shockwave through the ground that would instantly flash freeze the liquid villain, or alter the chemical composition of its body into harmless sodium bicarbonate. But Izuku hesitated. He remembered Dr. Tsubasa's warning all those years ago. What happens if you accidentally rewrite a human being? He had never used his quirk offensively on a living person. He had healed himself, yes. But to forcefully deconstruct and reconstruct a living, sentient being's cellular structure against their will, it crossed a moral and psychological line that Izuku was terrified of breaching. What if he miscalculated the villain's core biology? What if he turned the sludge into stone, and accidentally crystallized the villain's brain or nervous system, killing him instantly? Izuku's hands began to tremble. His heart hammered against his ribs. He wasn't a licensed hero. He didn't have the legal authority to use his quirk in combat, and more importantly, he didn't trust himself not to be lethal. Avoidance, Izuku decided, gripping the straps of his backpack tightly. I'll take the long way around and call the police from a payphone to report a villain lurking in the underpass. Izuku turned on his heel and jogged away from the tunnel, taking a sharp right down a bustling, sunlit street toward the Tatooine shopping district. He didn't know it, but that decision altered the timeline. He never walked into the tunnel. He never got attacked by the sludge villain, and consequently, All Might, who was currently tracking the villain through the sewer system, never dropped from the sky to save a green-haired boy, and never accidentally dropped the bottles containing the captured villain. Instead, the sludge villain, frustrated by his lost prey, slipped through the grate and continued moving through the city's subterranean pipes, looking for a suitable host. Izuku had just reached the edge of the Tatooine shopping district, pulling out a handful of yen coins to find a public phone, when the ground violently shook beneath his feet. Boom! A massive explosion shattered the afternoon peace. The shockwave rattled the windows of the nearby storefronts, sending a flock of pigeons scattering into the sky. A plume of thick black smoke billowed up from the center of the shopping arcade, followed by the terrifying sound of shattering glass and screaming civilians. Izuku froze, his heart dropping into his stomach. He didn't need to look at the smoke. His sensory map picked it up instantly, carried on the sudden rush of wind. Nitroglycerin, the distinct, unmistakable chemical signature of burning caramel and violent kinetic energy. Kaken. Izuku didn't think. He didn't hesitate. The fear of his own power, the legal restrictions, the moral dilemmas, all of it vanished, replaced by a singular, blinding imperative. His childhood friend was in danger. Izuku dropped his heavy backpack onto the sidewalk. He took off at a dead sprint, his legs churning as he pushed his physical body to its absolute limit, weaving through the panicked crowd of civilians fleeing the arcade. Get back! It's dangerous! A police officer yelled, trying to hold up a cordon of yellow tape. Izuku ducked under the tape, ignoring the officer's shouts. He rounded the corner into the main plaza of the shopping district, and the sight that greeted him made his blood run cold. The arcade was a war zone. Several storefronts were engulfed in roaring flames. The asphalt was cracked and cratered, the air thick with suffocating heat and black smoke. And in the center of the chaos, a nightmare was unfolding. The sludge villain, the very same mass of volatile organic compounds Izuku had sensed in the tunnel, had erupted from the sewers in the middle of the crowded street. But he wasn't alone. The villain had engulfed Katsuki Bakugo. Katsuki was struggling violently, his eyes wide with genuine, primal terror as the thick, putrid sludge forced its way into his mouth and nose, suffocating him. In his panic, Katsuki was setting off massive explosions from his palms, trying to blast the villain away. But the explosions were doing nothing but feeding the flames around them, setting the city on fire. The villain's fluid body simply absorbed the kinetic blasts, reshaping itself instantly. A perimeter of pro-heroes stood helplessly on the sidelines. Death Arms, a hero known for his immense physical strength, was gritting his teeth. I can't grab him. It's like trying to punch water. My hands just slip right through. Kamui Woods, the rising star with a wood manipulation quirk, was forced back by the heat. My wood will ignite instantly in this fire. I can't get close enough to bind him. Empty Lady, the giantess, was stuck at the entrance of the alleyway. I need 2 lanes at least. I can't fit in there without crushing the civilians. We just have to wait for someone with a suitable quirk. Another hero yelled over the roar of the flames. Just hold the perimeter. Try to contain the fire. Wait! Izuku's mind screamed as he stared at the scene. Wait for who? Kaken is suffocating right now. His brain is being deprived of oxygen. In exactly 90 seconds, he'll suffer irreversible neurological damage. In 2 minutes, he'll be dead. Izuku looked at Katsuki. Through the swirling mass of dark green sludge, Katsuki's crimson eyes locked onto Izuku's. It wasn't a look of anger. It wasn't a challenge. It was a silent, desperate plea for help. Izuku moved. Hey! Kid! Stop! Death Arms roared, lunging forward to grab Izuku's shoulder. But Izuku was already moving too fast, fueled by adrenaline. He slipped past the pro-hero's grasp, sprinting directly toward the raging inferno. As he ran, time seemed to slow down. Izuku's mind, honed by years of obsessive, terrified study, entered a state of absolute, hyper-focused calculation. He analyzed the battlefield. He analyzed the villain. The villain is fluid. A colloidal suspension of organic polymers, water, and highly concentrated acids. Katsuki is trapped inside. If I use thermal restructuring, I'll cook Katsuki. If I use kinetic force, the villain will absorb it. Izuku reached up and gripped the fingers of his white gloves with his teeth. I can't destroy him. I have to transmute him. I need to change the state of his matter without altering his core biological blueprint, so he doesn't die. I need to remove the water. He ripped the gloves off his hands, throwing the white cotton into the burning air. Silicon dioxide. Calcium carbonate. Aluminum oxide. I need to draw the minerals from the concrete beneath him, force them into his cellular structure, and strip the hydrogen and oxygen bonds from his fluid matrix. I will turn his liquid biology into dry, friable earth. Izuku was 10 feet away. The heat was blistering, singeing his eyebrows and the wild tips of his green hair. The sludge villain finally noticed the boy charging at him. Another brat? The villain gurgled, a massive tendril of acidic sludge whipping out toward Izuku. I'll take you too. Izuku didn't dodge. He didn't try to block. He dropped to his knees, sliding across the burning asphalt. He slammed both of his bare hands flat onto the ground. He closed his eyes, took a breath, and unleashed the full, unbridled power of synthesis. Restructure. The world didn't explode. It didn't roar. It sang. A blinding, incandescent wave of golden light erupted from Izuku's palms, sinking deep into the asphalt. The light didn't travel through the air, it traveled through the molecular bonds of the earth itself. The ground beneath the villain suddenly illuminated with glowing, geometric circuits of transmutational energy. The golden light surged upward, shooting out of the asphalt and directly into the sludge villain's amorphous body. The villain's confident sneer vanished, replaced by a look of sheer, incomprehensible horror. What is this? The villain screamed, his voice distorting into a dry, grinding rasp. My body. I can't. I'm drying out. Izuku held his hands on the ground, his teeth gritted in agony. The mental calculation required to selectively alter the villain's molecular structure while explicitly leaving Katsuki's human cells untouched was monumental. Blood began to drip from Izuku's nose, staining the asphalt beneath him as his brain pushed past its limits. The transformation was horrific and beautiful. Starting from the ground up, the dark, viscous, acidic slime began to pale. The wet, glistening surface turned matte, then gray, then brown. The liquid compounds were violently stripped of their moisture, the atoms forced into new, rigid crystalline structures. The villain tried to lash out, but his tendrils crumbled into dust midair. He was turning into soil. He was turning into dry, packed dirt. The process took exactly 4 seconds. The golden light faded. The roaring of the flames seemed deafening in the sudden stillness of the villain's defeat. Where a massive, terrifying monster of acidic sludge had just stood, there was now only a towering, fragile statue made of completely dry, crumbly brown dirt. It looked like an elaborate sandcastle in the shape of a monster. Embedded in the center of the dirt statue was Katsuki Bikugo. For a second, nothing happened. Then Katsuki shifted. The movement caused the dried, transmuted earth to lose its structural integrity. With a soft, cascading whoosh, the entire villain crumbled apart, collapsing into a massive pile of harmless, dry soil on the street. Katsuki fell to his hands and knees on the asphalt, coughing violently, gasping for sweet, oxygen-rich air. He was covered in dirt, but he was alive. He was completely unharmed. The silence that followed was absolute. The pro-heroes stared, their jaws literally hanging open. The civilians behind the police line were utterly motionless. The only sound was the crackling of the surrounding fires and Katsuki's ragged breathing. Izuku slowly pulled his hands off the asphalt. His palms were glowing with a faint, residual heat. He swayed on his knees, his vision swimming, a blinding migraine stabbing behind his eyes. He reached into his pocket with trembling fingers, pulled out a spare pair of gloves, and hastily shoved them onto his hands to shut off the sensory overload. What? Death Arms finally managed to choke out, stepping forward slowly, as if approaching an unexploded bomb. What just happened? What did you do? Kamui Wood stared at the pile of dirt, then at the green-haired boy kneeling on the ground. Did he just disintegrate the villain? He's alive, Izuku said, his voice raspy and exhausted. He wiped the blood from his nose with the back of his gloved wrist. He slowly stood up, his legs shaking, and pointed to the massive pile of dirt. I didn't destroy his core biological structure. I temporarily transmuted his fluid matrix into silicates and dry loam. He is currently in a state of suspended cellular stasis. If you apply a highly concentrated saline solution to the soil, he will revert back to his original state. But I suggest you put him in a sealed, reinforced containment unit before you rehydrate him. The pro-heroes just stared at him, completely uncomprehending. A 14-year-old boy had just given them a flawless chemical breakdown of a God-tier quirk manifestation. Suddenly, the spell was broken. Death Arm's shock morphed into sudden, defensive anger. He stomped over to Izuku, his large hands balling into fists. Are you out of your mind, kid? Death Arms yelled, though he noticeably kept his distance, not daring to actually touch Izuku. Do you have any idea how dangerous that was? You don't have a license. You could have killed the hostage. You could have killed the villain. You can't just run in and use a quirk like that. Izuku stood his ground. He didn't cower. He was exhausted, he was in pain, but he was incredibly, fiercely angry. The hostage is Katsuki Bakugo, Izuku said, his voice rising, cutting through the hero's reprimand with chilling, analytical precision. His quirk produces nitroglycerin-like sweat. He was detonating it inside a highly volatile, enclosed, methane-rich environment. Furthermore, he was being actively asphyxiated. According to standard medical literature, he had less than a minute before irreversible hypoxic brain injury occurred. Izuku pointed a gloved finger directly at Death Arms. Your physical strength was useless due to the villain's colloidal nature. Kamui Woods was incapacitated by the thermal output. Empty Lady was restricted by urban zoning and collateral damage protocols. You were all standing here, waiting for a quirk that suited the situation, while my classmate was dying in front of you. The heroes flinched, Izuku's words hitting them with the heavy, undeniable weight of truth. I possess a quirk that alters molecular structures, Izuku continued, his chest heaving. I calculated the risk, I isolated the hostage's biological signature, and I neutralized the threat without causing a single lethal injury to either party. I violated the quirk restriction laws, yes, but I saved his life. If you want to arrest me for vigilantism, fine. But do not tell me I was wrong to act when all of you did nothing. Silence descended on the plaza again, heavier than before. Death Arms opened his mouth to argue, but closed it again. Kamui Woods looked down at his feet in shame. They had been thoroughly, completely dressed down by a middle schooler. A few feet away, Katsuki finally caught his breath. He pushed himself up into a standing position, brushing the dry dirt off his school uniform. He looked at the pro-heroes, then he looked at Izuku. Katsuki's face was a tempest of emotion. Rage, humiliation, and a crushing, inescapable realization of the gap between them. He had been completely helpless, and Deku, the boy who wore gloves because he was afraid of his own shadow, had stepped in and reshaped reality with his bare hands to save him. Deku, Katsuki rasped. Izuku looked at him, his green eyes softening slightly. Are you okay, Kaken? Katsuki gritted his teeth, his fist shaking. He wanted to yell. He wanted to scream that he didn't need help. But the words died in his throat. He just glared at Izuku, turned his back, and shoved his way past the paramedics who were rushing onto the scene, walking away into the smoke without another word. High above the plaza, standing on the edge of a rooftop, a skeletal figure watched the entire exchange. Toshinori Yagi, the man known to the world as the symbol of peace, All Might, coughed violently, a spray of blood escaping his lips. He clutched his side, where a massive, disfiguring scar marred his torso. He had followed the explosions. He had arrived just as the green-haired boy sprinted into the fire. Toshinori had tried to move, tried to force his broken, exhausted body to buff up into his muscle form to save the boys. He had berated himself for his own pathetic weakness, but he hadn't needed to intervene. He had watched, with wide, sunken blue eyes, as the boy placed his hands on the earth. He had felt the sheer, unbelievable surge of power that radiated from the kid. It wasn't just raw, destructive force like One for All. It was control. It was absolute, undeniable mastery over the physical world. And then, he had listened to the boy's speech. He had heard the boy prioritize the life of the hostage, calculate the variables, and stand up to seasoned pro-heroes with the unshakable conviction of a true hero. He acted, Toshinori thought, his heart pounding against his ribs. While the pros stood by, while I stood by, his body moved on its own. He possesses a godlike quirk, but more importantly, he has the heart of a hero. Toshinori wiped the blood from his chin, his sunken eyes locking onto Izuku's retreating figure, as the boy finally gave a statement to the police and was allowed to leave the scene. Toshinori had come to Muzidafa looking for a successor. He had been looking for someone to inherit One for All, but looking at Izuku Midoriya, Toshinori realized something profound. That boy didn't need One for All. Giving that boy more power would be entirely redundant, perhaps even dangerous. What that boy needed was guidance. He needed a mentor to teach him how to carry the immense weight of the power he already possessed. He needed someone to teach him how to be a warrior, not just a scientist. Toshinori turned, slipping into the shadows of the stairwell, intent on tracking the boy down. The sun was beginning to set, casting long, orange shadows across the quiet suburban streets of Muzidafu. Izuku walked slowly, dragging his feet. His backpack felt like it weighed 100 pounds. His head was pounding with a rhythmic, agonizing throb. He had used his quirk on a massive scale, overriding his own safety protocols, and his brain was paying the price. He just wanted to get home, take a heavy dose of ibuprofen, and sleep for 12 hours. Hey! Deku! Izuku stopped, groaning internally, and turned around. Katsuki was storming down the street toward him, his hands shoved deep into his pockets, his shoulders hunched. His uniform was still dusted with brown dirt. Katsuki stopped a few feet away, refusing to meet Izuku's eyes. He glared at a street lamp instead. "Listen to me, you damn nerd," Katsuki ground out, his voice tight. "I didn't ask for your help. I had it under control. I was just about to blast that mud bastard to pieces. You didn't save me. You just got in the way with your freaky dirt magic." Izuku sighed. He was too tired for this. "Okay, Kaken, don't okay me," Katsuki snapped, looking at Izuku now, his crimson eyes blazing. "You think you're so far ahead of me now? You think because you pulled off one big trick that you've won? I'm going to UA. I'm going to work harder, and I'm going to get an absolute, undeniable victory over you. I am going to be number one, Deku. Don't you dare look down on me." Katsuki spun around and stomped away, his heavy footsteps echoing down the quiet street. Izuku watched him go, a small, tired smile touching his lips. It was Katsuki's incredibly messed up, aggressive way of saying thank you. It meant the rivalry was still on. Izuku turned back to continue his walk home, but he froze. Standing in the middle of the intersection, blocking his path, was a towering figure. He was incredibly tall, easily over 7 feet, with a gaunt, skeletal frame. He wore a ridiculously oversized yellow suit that hung off his bony shoulders like a tent. His face was sharp, shadowed, with hollow cheeks and striking, piercing blue eyes hidden beneath deep brow ridges. Long, messy blonde hair hung around his face. Izuku's breath caught in his throat. Even in this withered, unrecognizable form, Izuku's sensory map picked up the truth. Izuku didn't just see the man, he felt him. He felt the residual, terrifying embers of an energy that defied the laws of physics pulsing deep within the man's core. But more pressingly, Izuku felt the catastrophic damage. Izuku's eyes widened, his quirk automatically analyzing the man's biology. "Your respiratory system is severely compromised," Izuku blurted out, taking a step back, his hands raising defensively. "You're missing your entire stomach, and your left lung is completely destroyed. The scar tissue surrounding your abdominal cavity is extensive, and there are repeated surgical alterations. Your cellular decay rate is drastically out of sync with your age." The skeletal man froze. His piercing blue eyes widened in absolute shock. A dribble of blood leaked from the corner of his mouth. "You!" The man coughed, wiping his mouth with a handkerchief. "You can see that?" "I can feel it," Izuku said, his voice trembling slightly. He looked up, his brilliant green eyes locking onto the hollow blue ones. You're him, aren't you? Even like this. The energy signature. It's undeniable. Izuku swallowed hard, standing up straighter. You're All Might. Toshinori Yagi stood in stunned silence for a long moment. He had intended to reveal his secret to the boy, to explain his injury and his true form. But the boy had simply looked at him and diagnosed him with the precision of a master surgeon. Toshinori let out a barking, hollow laugh, leaning against a nearby telephone pole. Astounding. Truly astounding. Yes, young man. I am All Might. In a puff of steam, Toshinori's skeletal frame vanished, replaced instantly by the towering, impossibly muscular, heroic form of the symbol of peace. His bright costume stretched tight over his bulging muscles, his signature smile beaming like the sun. I am here! All Might boomed, flexing his arms. Though, it seems my disguise was entirely useless against your incredible quirk, young Midoriya. Izuku stared, his jaw dropping. Even knowing the truth, seeing the transformation was staggering. But even in this muscle form, Izuku could feel the intense, localized strain on All Might's biology. The man was literally forcing his broken body to hold together through sheer willpower and quirk energy. I saw what you did today at the shopping district, All Might continued, his booming voice softening slightly, dropping back down to a more serious register. He stepped forward, placing his large hands on his hips. I saw you dive into the fire when the pros hesitated. I heard your analysis of the situation. You possess a quirk that borders on the miraculous, my boy. But more than that, you possess the spirit of a true hero. Izuku felt tears prick the corners of his eyes. To hear those words from the man he had idolized his entire life, the man he had patterned his very soul after, it was overwhelming. I just did what I had to do, Izuku stammered, looking down at his gloved hands. I had to save him. But my quirk, it's dangerous, All Might. If I make a mistake, if my calculations are wrong, I could destroy everything. With a soft hiss of steam, All Might deflated back into his skeletal form, coughing lightly. He walked over and placed a large, bony hand on Izuku's shoulder. Power is always dangerous, young Midoriya, Toshinori said gently. The greater the power, the greater the burden. You have spent your life treating your quirk as a science experiment, a tool of absolute precision. You have honed your mind into a razor-sharp instrument. Toshinori looked Izuku up and down. He noted the wiry muscle, the exhaustion in the boy's eyes, and the heavy reliance on the white gloves. But you are not just a scientist, Toshinori said, his blue eyes piercing into Izuku's soul. You are trying to be a hero. And right now your body and your combat instincts cannot keep up with your mind. You rely entirely on your quirk to solve the problem, and when you do, it physically breaks you down. You lack the martial discipline, the physical endurance, and the split-second combat reflexes required to survive on the battlefield against villains who won't give you time to calculate. Izuku looked up, realizing the truth in All Might's words. If the sludge villain had been faster, if it had been a villain like Muscular or a speed type, Izuku wouldn't have had the 4 seconds he needed to place his hands on the ground and transmute the earth. He would have been killed before he could even think about the molecular structure. You have 10 months until the UA entrance exam, Toshinori stated, his voice ringing with a newfound, quiet intensity. Your quirk is already that of a top pro hero. I have nothing to teach you about your power. Toshinori stepped back, standing tall despite his frail frame. He pointed a long, bony finger directly at Izuku's chest. But I can teach you how to fight. I can train your body to withstand the neurological backlash of your power. I can teach you martial arts, situational awareness, and the physical conditioning required to stand on the front lines, not just on the sidelines. Toshinori smiled, a genuine, warm expression that crinkled the corners of his eyes. I was looking for a successor, Toshinori confessed quietly. But the world doesn't need a second All Might. The world needs an architect who can rebuild it when it falls apart. Let me be your mentor, Izuku Midoriya. Let me teach you how to be a warrior to match your godlike power. Izuku stared at the skeletal man. The setting sun cast a golden hue over the street, mirroring the transmutational light that Izuku held in his own hands. He didn't need to calculate this. He didn't need to analyze the molecular structure of the offer. He felt the truth in it, deep in his core. He couldn't do this alone. He needed the symbol of peace to show him how to carry the weight of the world. Izuku clenched his gloved fists, tears finally spilling over his eyelashes and streaming down his cheeks. He bowed deeply, a perfect 90-degree angle. Yes, All Might! Izuku cried out, his voice thick with emotion and fierce, burning determination. Please train me. I will do whatever it takes. Tashinori Yagi looked down at the bowing boy. He had found a prodigy. He had found a boy with the power to effortlessly manipulate matter, a boy who could heal his broken body with a touch, a boy who would one day reshape Hero Society entirely. Then rest well tonight, young Midoriya, All Might said, a wide grin spreading across his face. Because starting tomorrow at dawn, we are going to rebuild you from the ground up. The alarm clock didn't ring. It didn't need to. Izuku Midoriya was already awake, sitting cross-legged in the center of his bedroom floor, bathed in the pale, pre-dawn light filtering through his window. He was breathing in a measured, rhythmic cadence. In for 4 seconds. Hold for 4 seconds. Out for 4 seconds. It was a meditative breathing technique Tashinori had drilled into him over the past 10 months, designed to lower his heart rate and quiet the relentless, buzzing hum of molecular data that constantly flooded his brain. Izuku opened his eyes. He didn't look like the skinny, trembling boy who had stared down the sludge villain 10 months ago. Dagoba Municipal Beach Park had been his crucible, but unlike the original timeline, All Might hadn't just made Izuku move trash to build raw muscle. Izuku could have cleared that entire beach in 5 minutes by transmuting the mountains of rusted refrigerators and broken washing machines into a single, compact cube of high-density iron. Instead, Tashinori had forbidden Izuku from using his quirk for the first 6 months. Your mind is a supercomputer, young Midoriya, Tashinori had said on their first day, standing amidst the towering piles of garbage. But your body is a fragile shell. If you rely solely on your quirk, a villain with a dampening ability, or a speedster who can close the distance before you can calculate the atomic structure of your defense, will kill you. I am going to teach you how to survive when your hands are tied. And so, Izuku had learned to fight. He learned boxing, focusing on footwork, evasion, and reading his opponent's center of gravity. He learned judo, learning how to use an attacker's momentum against them. He ran until his lungs burned, did push-ups until his arms gave out, and sparred with a man who, even in his skeletal form, possessed decades of unparalleled combat experience. Izuku looked down at his hands. He wore custom-made, fingerless compression gloves. They were woven from a specialized, high-tensile aramid fiber he had researched himself, designed to compress the nerves in his palms just enough to muffle the passive sensory overload of his quirk, while leaving his fingertips exposed for instantaneous matter manipulation. He clenched his fists. The muscles in his forearms coiled tightly. He was ready. Izuku? Are you awake, sweetheart? Inko's soft voice called from the kitchen, accompanied by the smell of frying fish and miso soup. I'm awake, Mom. Izuku called back. He stood up, his movements fluid and balanced. He walked over to his mirror, pulling on his black Gakurin uniform. He fastened the gold buttons, grabbed his reinforced yellow backpack, and walked out into the living room. Inko stood by the door, wringing her hands nervously. Do you have your exam ticket? Pencils? Erasers? I have everything, Mom. Izuku smiled, a gentle, reassuring expression. Inko looked up at him. She saw the broadness of his shoulders, the quiet, focused intensity in his emerald eyes. He had grown so much, matured so rapidly under the mysterious personal trainer he had been working with. She didn't know the trainer was All Might, but she knew whoever he was, he had helped her son bridge the gap between his terrifying power and his fragile humanity. Good luck, Izuku, she whispered, stepping up on her tiptoes to kiss his cheek. I know you're going to do amazing. Thanks, Mom. I'll see you tonight. The gates of UA High School were colossal, towering arches of steel and glass that looked less like a school entrance, and more like the gates to a modern Olympus. The morning sun gleamed off the pristine architecture, casting long shadows over the hundreds of nervous teenagers funneling through the entrance. Izuku walked among them, his presence entirely unobtrusive. He kept his sensory map pulled in tight, restricted to a 1-meter radius just to avoid bumping into anyone. The sheer concentration of different materials, quirks, and pheromones in the crowd was dizzying. Out of my way, extras! The familiar, aggressive snarl cut through the murmur of the crowd. Izuku didn't even need to turn his head. He recognized the heavy, stomping footfalls and the ambient spike in localized ambient heat. Katsuki Bakugo marched up the paved pathway, his hands shoved deep into his pockets, his crimson eyes glaring daggers at anyone who dared to make eye contact with him. The crowd naturally parted for him, intimidated by his fierce aura. Izuku stopped and turned. "Good morning, Kaken." Katsuki halted. He looked Izuku up and down. He noted the way Izuku stood, perfectly balanced, his center of gravity low, no longer slouching with defensive anxiety. Katsuki's jaw clenched. The memory of the sludge villain incident, of being trapped while Deku effortlessly turned his nightmare to dust, still burned like a brand on his pride. "Don't talk to me, Deku," Katsuki growled, his voice low. "Just because you got a little muscle on your bones doesn't mean you're in my league. I'm going to crush this exam, and I'm going to get the top score. If you get in my way, I'll blow you to ash." Izuku didn't flinch. "I'm not going to get in your way, Kaken. But I'm not going to hold back either." Katsuki scoffed, a harsh, dismissive sound, and shoved his way past Izuku, marching toward the main building. Izuku watched him go, exhaling softly. He turned to continue his walk, but a sudden fluctuation in his localized sensory map caught his attention. It was a sudden shift in gravitational density. A girl with a brown bob and bright, rosy cheeks had tripped over her own feet. Izuku's quirk automatically analyzed the situation. She's falling forward. Velocity is increasing. However, there's a localized negation of mass occurring around her fingertips. Before she could hit the ground, Izuku stepped forward smoothly. He didn't catch her. He didn't need to. He simply extended his hand, hovering it an inch beneath her knee. Increase localized air density. Solidify nitrogen. A faint, invisible cushion of hardened air caught the girl's knee just before it scraped the pavement. The girl gasped, floating weightlessly for a second as her own quirk activated, before Izuku gently released the air cushion, allowing her to touch down softly on the balls of her feet. The girl blinked, looking down at the ground, then up at Izuku in confusion. "Whoa, did you do that? Or did I do that?" "You negated your own gravity," Izuku said politely, offering her a small bow. "I just created a temporary pneumatic buffer to prevent you from scraping your knee before your quirk fully activated. You should be careful. The pavement here is an aggregate of quartz and basalt. It has a high friction coefficient. It would have caused severe abrasions." The girl stared at him, her large brown eyes blinking rapidly as she processed his incredibly technical warning. Then, a bright, sunny smile broke across her face. "Wow! That's a super smart quirk. I'm Ochiko Uraraka." She beamed, clapping her hands together. "I was so nervous I completely tripped over my own feet. Thanks for catching me." "Well, sort of, Izuku Midoriya," he replied, giving a small, polite nod. "It is a pleasure to meet you, Uraraka. Good luck on your exam." He didn't stick around to chat, seamlessly re-entering the flow of the crowd. Uraraka watched him walk away, tilting her head. "What a serious guy. But he seems nice." The written portion of the UA entrance exam was notoriously difficult, designed to weed out those who relied purely on physical power. It covered advanced calculus, modern hero law, physics, and situational ethics. For Izuku, whose brain was accustomed to processing the exact atomic weight and electron configuration of any object he touched in real time, the exam was almost insultingly easy. He sat in the massive lecture hall, his mechanical pencil flying across the page. He finished the 2-hour exam in 45 minutes. He spent the remaining hour and 15 minutes mentally redesigning the structural supports of the lecture hall to better withstand seismic activity, tracing the invisible stress points in the ceiling with his eyes. When the bell finally rang, Izuku neatly stacked his papers and handed them in. Next was the orientation for the practical exam. The students were herded into a colossal, dimly lit auditorium. Izuku found his assigned seat, which happened to be directly next to Katsuki. Katsuki shot him a sideways glare but said nothing, crossing his arms and sinking low into his chair. The stage lights snapped on, and the voice hero, Present Mike, strutted out to the podium, striking a dynamic pose. "Welcome to today's live performance," Present Mike roared, his voice quirk amplifying the sound to deafening levels. Everybody say hey. Silence. Pure, awkward silence from the terrified middle schoolers. Izuku winced slightly, adjusting the acoustic intake of his own ears by subconsciously stiffening his tympanic membrane just a fraction to dampen the painful volume. Tough crowd. Present Mike recovered seamlessly. Alright, let's get right into the main event. The practical exam. You'll be experiencing 10 minutes of mock cityscape battles. After this presentation, you'll head to your specified battle centers. Okay? Izuku looked down at his printout. Examinee number 2234. Battle Center B. He glanced over at Katsuki's card. Battle Center A. They were splitting up students from the same middle schools to prevent cooperation. Logical. In your respective battle centers, there are 3 types of faux villains. Present Mike continued, pointing to a massive screen behind him that displayed 8-bit graphics of robots. They are worth 1, 2, or 3 points depending on their difficulty. Use your quirks to disable these faux villains and rack up that high score. But remember, attacking other examinees is strictly prohibited. Suddenly, a tall, broad-shouldered boy with glasses stood up in the middle of the auditorium, his hand raised as rigid as a board. Excuse me, may I ask a question? The boy shouted, his voice booming with authority. A spotlight instantly snapped onto him. Hit me. Present Mike pointed. On the printout, there are 4 types of villains, not 3. The boy declared, aggressively pointing at the paper. If this is a misprint, then UA, the top hero academy in Japan, should be ashamed of such a foolish mistake. We are examinees here to be molded into exemplary heroes. The boy then spun around, pointing directly at Izuku. And you, with the curly hair. Izuku blinked, looking up calmly. You have been sitting there staring at your hands with a blank expression for the past 10 minutes. The boy scolded loudly. If you are not going to take this seriously, then you should leave immediately. You are distracting, the auditorium murmured. Katsuki leaned over, a cruel smirk on his face. Get 'em 4 eyes, he muttered. Izuku didn't blush. He didn't stutter. He didn't apologize profusely like he might have in another life. He simply turned his head, his emerald eyes locking onto the boy with glasses. I apologize if my silence offends you, Izuku said, his voice carrying clearly across the quieted auditorium without the need for a microphone. However, the structural layout of the faux villains on the pamphlet heavily implies that the 4th villain is a localized hazard rather than a point-scoring target, much like an obstacle in a traditional video game. It is likely a 0-pointer designed to test our situational awareness and threat avoidance. I was simply calculating the probable kinetic output required to disable such a machine based on the silhouette provided. As for my hands, they are the instruments of my quirk. I am calibrating myself. Please, allow the pro hero to finish his presentation. The boy with glasses froze, his mouth falling open slightly. He looked at the pamphlet, looked at Izuku, and then looked up at Present Mike. Present Mike grinned widely, pointing a finger gun at Izuku. Right on the money, examinee 2234. Give it up for the smart guy in the middle. The boy with glasses bowed stiffly. I apologize for my presumption. Thank you for the explanation. He sat down quickly, his face flushed. Katsuki clicked his tongue in annoyance, looking away from Izuku. As the sharp-eyed examinee pointed out, Present Mike continued, the 4th villain is worth 0 points. It's an obstacle we'll be unleashing in every center. You can defeat it, but there's no merit to it. I recommend you all just run away from it. Izuku analyzed the information. A colossal obstacle. A test of the flight response in the fight-or-flight paradigm. A true hero must know when a fight is futile and prioritize civilian safety, or tactical retreat. That's all from me. Present Mike shouted. I leave you with our school motto. Go beyond. Plus ultra. Now go break a leg. Battle Center B was a breathtaking feat of engineering. It was a fully realized, miniature city, complete with skyscrapers, winding streets, traffic lights, and storefronts, all enclosed within massive, fortified concrete walls. Izuku stood near the front of the massive double doors, stretching his legs. He was wearing his custom, dark green tracksuit, form-fitting and breathable, paired with his reinforced red sneakers and his fingerless compression gloves. Around him, Dozens of other teenagers were stretching, praying, or nervously hyping themselves up. Izuku recognized the gravity girl, Uraraka, standing a few yards away, taking deep breaths. He also noticed the boy with glasses, who was doing rigorous lunges. Izuku closed his eyes and pushed his sensory map forward. He couldn't feel the entire city, it was too large, but he could feel the immediate 100 meters beyond the gate. He felt the heavy, dense vibrations of enormous machinery. Steel treads. Hydraulic joints. Lithium-ion power cores. The robots were already active, waiting in the streets. Right, let's start. President Mick's voice blasted from hidden speakers. None of the other students moved. They were waiting for a countdown. 3, 2, 1. But Izuku knew real battles didn't have countdowns. The moment the word start echoed, Izuku's eyes snapped open. He didn't just run. He manipulated the earth beneath his shoes. He sent a micropulse of transmutational energy into the asphalt, stripping the friction from the ground instantly while solidifying a small, ramp-like wedge of concrete behind his heels. He pushed off, the sudden lack of friction and the angled block launching him forward like a bullet fired from a gun. He shot through the slowly opening gates before anyone else had even twitched. What are you waiting for? Present Mike yelled from the speakers. There are no countdowns in real battles. Run, run, run! The kid with the green hair already has a head start. The rest of the examinees panicked, scrambling forward in a chaotic stampede. But Izuku was already a block away. He rounded a corner and came face to face with his first targets. 3 one-pointer robots, rolling on single large wheels, their optical sensors glowing a menacing red. Target acquired, the robots buzzed in unison, raising their metallic blasters. Izuku didn't slow down. He didn't adopt a fighting stance. He kept sprinting directly at them. Carbon steel alloy armor, his mind calculated instantly. Thickness, 15 millimeters. Power source, central chest cavity. I don't need to destroy the whole thing. I just need to sever the locomotion. Izuku dove into a forward roll, sliding effortlessly beneath the laser fire of the first robot. As he came up out of the roll, his exposed fingertips brushed the asphalt of the street. Spike. He didn't need to shout the word. It was just a mental trigger. A flash of golden light illuminated the alleyway. The asphalt beneath the 3 robots instantly liquefied, surged upward like a violent wave, and then hardened into 4 massive, jagged spears of ultra-dense concrete. The concrete spears pierced straight through the thin underbellies of the one-pointers, shattering their central power cores and lifting them 2 feet off the ground. The robots sparked, groaned, and died instantly. 3 points, Izuku noted mentally, not even breaking his stride. He vaulted over the impaled machines and turned the next corner. 2 two-pointers, robotic scorpions with heavy-tailed blasters, were waiting. They fired simultaneously. Izuku used his martial arts training, pivoting sharply on his left foot, letting the kinetic blast scorch the air where his chest had been a millisecond before. He closed the distance in a blur. He leaped into the air, bringing his right foot down onto the head of the first scorpion to use it as a springboard. He launched himself toward the second one. While in midair, he reached out with his left hand and grabbed the heavy steel tail of the 2-pointer. Iron. Carbon. Chromium. Remove the carbon. Introduce localized oxygen. Accelerate oxidation. Golden light flared around his hand. In a fraction of a second, the pristine, shining steel of the robot's tail turned into brittle, flaky, reddish-brown rust. The structural integrity vanished. Izuku landed gracefully on the ground, holding the severed, rusted tip of the tail. The robot, attempting to swing its now disintegrated weapon, lost its balance and tipped forward. Izuku simply stepped aside, placed his hand on the chassis, and fused its internal gears together with a pulse of heat. The robot froze, a statue of rusted, fused metal. 7 points. It had been exactly 45 seconds since the exam started. Izuku fell into a state of pure flow. This was his element. He was an architect of destruction, dancing through a cityscape made of building blocks that only he could rearrange. He didn't punch. He didn't kick. He touched, and the world obeyed. A 3-pointer charged him. Izuku touched the wall of a building, turning a section of the brick into a perfectly molded, high-tensile steel net that dropped over the machine, trapping it. 10 points. A group of 2-pointers surrounded him. Izuku touched the street, transmuting a 10-foot radius of solid asphalt into incredibly deep, viscous quicksand. The robots sank instantly, their motors choking on the dirt. With a second touch, he hardened the sand back into solid stone, trapping them up to their optical sensors. 16 points. Other examinees began to arrive in his sector, hoping to scavenge points. They stopped dead in their tracks, staring in absolute, terrifying awe. They saw a boy with wild green hair, moving like a phantom. Everywhere his hands touched, reality warped. Robots collapsed into rust, the streets swallowed enemies whole, and buildings grew spikes to impale the machines. There were no loud explosions, no screaming battle cries. There were only flashes of golden light, the screeching of tearing metal, and absolute, clinical efficiency. What is his quirk? One boy whispered, terrified, backing away as Izuku effortlessly turned a 3-pointer's armor into brittle glass and shattered it with a flick of his wrist. He's a monster, another girl breathed. Izuku ignored them. He was focused. He was breathing heavily, a thin trickle of blood starting to leak from his left nostril. The constant, rapid-fire quantum calculations were taking their toll, building a localized migraine behind his eyes. But his physical conditioning held. He wasn't passing out. He was fighting through the pain. 35 points. 40 points. 52 points. He had lost count of the minutes. He only knew the points. High above the battle centers, in a darkened observation room, the faculty of UA High School sat before a massive bank of monitors. This year's crop looks promising. Midnight, the R-rated hero, purred, crossing her legs. Look at that Bakugo boy in Center A. His destructive power is ferocious. He's already at 60 points. The Gravity Girl in Center B is showing excellent spatial awareness, noted Snipe, the Kalba-themed hero. And the Ida boy is utilizing his speed effectively to clear wide areas. But Aizawa Shoyuda, the Erasure hero, leaned forward, his tired, bloodshot eyes narrowed as he stared fixedly at the center monitor displaying Battle Center B. Look at Examinee 2234. Nizu, the Chimera principal of UA, steepled his paws together, a glint of absolute fascination in his beady black eyes. Izuku Midoriya. Yes, I have been watching him since the gates opened. The teachers shifted their attention to the screen. They watched a replay from moments ago. A massive 3-pointer fired a missile at Izuku. The boy didn't dodge. He simply reached out, his fingertips glowing gold. The missile hit his palm, and instantly turned into a flurry of harmless, soft rose petals that fluttered around him as he continued running. The room fell dead silent. What in the world did he just do? President Mike asked, pulling his sunglasses down the bridge of his nose. Did he just turn a high-explosive warhead into flowers? Transmutation, Nisa said softly, his tail swishing. True, flawless matter manipulation. He is altering the atomic structure of the objects he touches. Look at the efficiency. He isn't just destroying the robots, he's dismantling them at a molecular level, or utilizing the environment to neutralize them. His movements are incredibly refined, Aizawa noted, his professional eye catching the subtle details. He's not relying solely on his quirk. His footwork is flawless. He's using minimal effort to position himself for the perfect strike. He's been trained by a master martial artist. In the back of the room, Toshinori Yagi, in his skeletal form, smiled proudly, hiding a small cough behind his hand. That's my boy, he thought. His villain score is currently at 75. Midnight read off the tablet in her hand, her eyes wide. He's completely cleared the northern quadrant of Center B by himself. But a quirk like that, it must have a devastating drawback. To process that much chemical and physical data on the fly, it would fry a normal brain. Indeed, Nizu agreed. Notice the blood on his upper lip. He is suffering from severe neurological strain. But his willpower is keeping him moving. Still, a hero is not defined merely by how many enemies they can destroy. Nizu reached out a white paw and hovered it over a large red button on his console. Let us see how they react to true, insurmountable terror, Nizu said cheerfully, and pressed the button. 79 points, Izuku calculated, wiping the blood from his nose with the back of his gloved wrist. The migraine was bad now. It felt like an ice pick was being driven into his frontal lobe. His breathing was ragged. He had been using synthesis almost non-stop for 8 minutes. He needed to stop. He had more than enough points to pass. He leaned against the concrete wall, closing his eyes, focusing on his meditative breathing to flush the pain away. Suddenly, the earth beneath him lurched violently. It wasn't a localized tremor. It was a massive, seismic event. The buildings around him groaned, glass shattering in the windows of the faux storefronts. Izuku's eyes snapped open. The sensory map in his brain screamed in agony as it was flooded with the sheer mass of the object emerging from the center of the city. A shadow fell over the entire street. Izuku looked up. It was the zero-pointer. But robot felt like an inadequate word. It was a walking skyscraper. Its colossal green treads crushed entire buildings into powder as it rolled forward. Its single, glowing red eye swept over the panic-stricken examinees below. Less than 2 minutes remaining. President Mick's voice echoed. The other students screamed. The bravado they had shown fighting the smaller robots vanished instantly in the face of this mechanical leviathan. They turned and ran for the exit. Izuku analyzed it. Mass, tens of thousands of tons. Composition, reinforced titanium alloys, heavy hydraulics. Threat level, absolute. If I tried to transmute that entire machine, Izuku realized grimly, the calculation required would literally cause my brain to hemorrhage. I would die before the golden light even reached its chest. President Mike had said to run away from it. It was the logical choice. Izuku turned to follow the fleeing examinees. Ow! Help! The cry was faint, almost drowned out by the grinding of the zero-pointer's treads, but Izuku's heightened senses caught it. He snapped his head around. About 50 yards away, right in the path of the encroaching titan, was Ochiko Uraraka. A massive chunk of rubble from a destroyed building had fallen, pinning her right leg to the asphalt. She was desperately pushing against it, trying to use her quirk to lighten it, but her face was pale, her fingers slipping from exhaustion. The zero-pointer was rolling directly toward her. Its treads were the size of houses. In 10 seconds she would be crushed into a fine paste. The other examinees were running right past her. Even the boy with glasses, Ida, was frozen in terror, looking back but unable to force his legs to move toward the colossal machine. Izuku didn't think. He didn't calculate the risk to his own life. The logic centers of his brain shut down, overridden by the screaming, primal instinct of his soul. Save her. Izuku sprinted. He pushed his exhausted legs to their absolute limit. He didn't use his quirk to speed himself up. He needed every ounce of mental processing power for what he was about to do. Deku? Uraraka cried out, using the nickname she had heard the angry blonde boy yell earlier, as she saw Izuku charging directly at the mountain of steel. What are you doing? Run! Keep your head down! Izuku roared, sliding into the dirt right beside her pinned leg. The zero-pointer was upon them. The massive, spiked steel tread descended, casting them in absolute darkness. The roar of the engines was deafening. Izuku didn't punch the air. He didn't try to smash the robot back. He stood up, planting his feet firmly in the cracked asphalt, standing directly over Uraraka. He reached up, tearing both of his compression gloves off with his teeth, spitting them onto the ground. He raised his bare hands, palms facing the descending ceiling of spiked steel. Titanium. Steel. Copper. Oil. I don't need to destroy it. I just need to reshape it. I need to take the momentum and bend it around us. The massive steel tread made contact with Izuku's palms. For a microsecond, the sheer kinetic force of the machine threatened to snap his arms like twigs. But in that same microsecond, synthesis activated at a level Izuku had never dared to attempt. Synthesize Bastion! Izuku screamed, his voice tearing from his throat. The explosion of golden light was so blindingly bright that it flashed across the entire battle center like a miniature sun. In the observation room, the monitors widened out entirely, forcing the teachers to shield their eyes. The transmutational energy surged from Izuku's hands and injected itself directly into the atomic structure of the zero-pointer. It wasn't destruction. It was high-speed, localized architectural engineering on a massive scale. The steel tread hitting Izuku didn't crush him. It liquefied upon contact, flowing around him and Uraraka like a heavy, metallic river. Izuku's eyes rolled back in his head, blood pouring from both nostrils and the corners of his eyes. His brain was on fire. He was actively calculating the trajectory, mass, and structural integrity of thousands of tons of metal moving at high speeds. He commanded the metal to part. He commanded the titanium to bend. The bottom half of the zero-pointer was violently deconstructed from the inside out. The massive gears, the hydraulic pistons, the heavy armor plating, all of it was stripped of its original shape and forced into a new one. The metal flowed down, anchoring itself deep into the bedrock of the street, forming a colossal, perfectly smooth, half-spherical dome over Izuku and Uraraka. Izuku rapidly synthesized the molecular bonds, reinforcing the steel with carbon pulled from the surrounding asphalt, creating a tungsten steel alloy with unparalleled tensile strength. Above the dome, the upper half of the zero-pointer, having suddenly lost its entire lower chassis and internal support structure, groaned violently. The sheer momentum carried the colossal torso forward, but without its treads, it simply toppled. With a deafening, earth-shattering crash, the top half of the zero-pointer slammed into the street behind the dome, sliding for 50 yards before grinding to a catastrophic halt, kicking up a tsunami of dust and debris that blanketed the city. Inside the dome, it was pitch black. The roar of the collapsing machine echoed outside, but inside, the air was still and silent. Izuku fell to his knees, his hands dropping to the ground. He gasped for air, his lungs burning. The migraine was so severe he couldn't see straight. Geometric patterns flashed across his vision. He was bleeding heavily from his nose, painting the ground beneath him red. Midoriya? A trembling voice whispered in the dark. Izuku focused, using his sensory map to see in the pitch black. Uraraka was beside him, completely unharmed. The rubble that had pinned her leg had been disintegrated during the dome's construction. Are you hurt? Izuku rasped, his voice barely a whisper. I'm fine, Uraraka said, her hands reaching out in the dark until she found his shoulder. What did you do? Where are we? We're inside a tungsten steel alloy dome, Izuku explained weakly, coughing. I deconstructed the lower chassis of the robot, and repurposed the materials to form a protective shell over us to deflect the collapsing mass of the upper torso. Uraraka sat there in the dark, her mind utterly failing to comprehend the scale of what he had just casually described. He had taken a building-sized robot and turned it into a bunker in the span of 3 seconds. Time's up. President Mick's voice echoed faintly through the thick metal of the dome. The exam was over. Izuku let out a long, shaky breath. Okay. I'll let us out now. He placed a hand against the inside of the dome. He didn't need to do any complex calculations this time. He just needed to revert the metal back to a brittle state, remove the carbon, weaken the bonds. A soft, golden glow illuminated the inside of the dome. A moment later, the thick, impenetrable metal wall suddenly turned into brittle, oxidized iron. Izuku gently pushed his palm forward. The wall of the dome shattered outward like fragile glass, breaking into a million pieces of harmless rust that crumbled to the ground, letting the afternoon sunlight stream back in. The dust was settling over Battle Center B. The other examinees were standing in a wide circle, staring in absolute, stunned silence. Behind Izuku and Uraraka lay the ruined, decapitated top half of the zero-pointer, a testament to the colossal machine that had just been there. And where the bottom half should have been, there was only a mountain of rusted flakes. Izuku stood up slowly, his legs wobbling. His face was pale, his tracksuit stained with dust and his own blood. He looked like he had been through a war. Ida Tenya pushed his way to the front of the crowd, his eyes wide behind his glasses. He looked at the ruined robot, then at the girl who was now free, and finally at Izuku. He saw the danger, Ida thought, deeply ashamed of his own inaction. He knew the robot was worth 0 points. He had nothing to gain. He risked his own life. He used the technique that clearly causes him immense physical harm, just to save a girl he met this morning. I judged him, but he is infinitely more of a hero than I am. Very well done, a crotchety voice called out. An old woman with a syringe walking stick hobbled through the crowd. It was Recovery Girl, the youthful heroine and UA's premier nurse. She was handing out gummy bears to the exhausted students. She walked up to Izuku, looking up at him with a critical eye. She noted the severe nosebleed and the pallor of his skin. You pushed your quirk far beyond its safe limits, Sonny, Recovery Girl chided gently. That's severe neurological strain. Come here, let me give you a smooch and heal you up. She puckered her lips, leaning forward. No thank you, ma'am, Izuku said politely, taking a small step back, holding up a blood-stained hand. I appreciate the offer, but your quirk accelerates the patient's natural cellular regeneration by taxing their stamina, correct? Recovery Girl paused, raising an eyebrow. That's right. How do you know that? I study quirks, Izuku said, his breathing slowly steadying as the adrenaline faded. I'm currently suffering from acute quirk exhaustion and a localized pressure buildup in my cranial blood vessels. My physical stamina is entirely depleted. If you use your quirk on me right now, the sudden draw on my remaining stamina could induce a comatose state or cardiac arrest. Recovery Girl's jaw actually dropped. The surrounding examinees, including Uraraka and Ida, stared at Izuku as if he had just started speaking an alien language. Well, Recovery Girl huffed, a smile tugging at the corner of her mouth. You're a sharp one. A bit too smart for your own good. But you're bleeding. How do you propose to fix it? Izuku raised his right hand. He didn't have his gloves on. He placed 2 fingers against his own temple. Constrict the ruptured capillaries in the nasal cavity. Alleviate the intracranial pressure by reabsorbing the excess fluid. Mend the micro-fissures in the frontal lobe. A very faint, warm golden glow pulsed from his fingertips into his own skin. Instantly, the blood stopped dripping from his nose. The deathly pallor left his face, replaced by a healthy flush. The blinding migraine that had been agonizing him simply vanished, evaporating like mist under a hot sun. Izuku let out a long sigh of relief, dropping his hand. He pulled a handkerchief from his pocket and wiped the dried blood from his face. I can manually restructure my own biology to repair the damage, Izuku explained calmly to the flabbergasted pro-hero. It requires less calculation than external transmutation because my brain already possesses the blueprint of my own body. Recovery Girl stared at him for a long, quiet moment. Then, she started to laugh. It was a rich, hearty chuckle. Well, I'll be, she grinned, handing him a handful of gummy bears. You might just put me out of a job, kid. Go on home and rest. You've done more than enough today. Izuku took the gummy bears, bowing deeply. Thank you, Recovery Girl. He turned, found his discarded compression gloves on the ground, dusted them off, and slipped them back onto his hands. As he walked toward the exit, the crowd of examinees parted for him instinctively. There was no whispering this time. There was only absolute, reverent silence. 1 week later, Izuku sat at his desk in his bedroom, nervously bouncing his leg. He was staring at the small, unmarked holographic projector disc that had arrived in the mail that morning, bearing the official wax seal of UA High School. Inko was pacing in the living room, too nervous to even be in the same room. Izuku took a deep breath, reached out, and pressed the button on the disc. The projector whirred to life, projecting a massive, high-definition hologram against the wall of his bedroom. I am here as a projection. All Might's voice boomed, his massive face filling the screen. Izuku gasped, his heart leaping into his throat. He knew All Might was a teacher at UA. Toshinori had told him, but seeing him on the official acceptance letter was still surreal. Young Midoriya. All Might grinned, pointing a finger at the camera. You did excellent on the written exam. A perfect score, in fact. But of course, the practical exam is where the true test lies. A smaller window appeared next to All Might, showing a scoreboard. You accumulated an astonishing 79 villain points. All Might announced proudly. That alone would have secured your place at the top of the roster. But, a Hero Academy cannot judge its students solely on destruction. The screen shifted, showing a replay of the exam. But it wasn't Izuku destroying robots. It was the moment he stopped, turned around, and sprinted toward the zero-pointer to save Uraraka. It showed the blinding flash of light, and the miraculous creation of the impenetrable dome. You saw a fellow examinee in danger, and you did not hesitate, All Might said, his tone softening, filled with genuine emotion. You risked yourself, and utilized your power not to destroy, but to protect. That is the essence of a hero. A new score appeared on the screen, adding to the 79. Rescue points, 60. With a combined score of 139 points, You have utterly shattered the previous entrance exam record. All Might declared, throwing his arms wide. The screen changed again, showing a small clip of Uraraka talking to Present Mike after the exam, asking if she could give some of her points to the boy who saved her. Izuku felt a lump form in his throat. She had tried to give up her own chances for him. Come, young Midoriya, All Might smiled, holding a hand out toward the camera as if reaching through the screen. This is your Hero Academia. The world is waiting to see what you will build. The hologram faded to black. Izuku sat in his chair, staring at the empty wall for a long time. The tears finally spilled over, running down his cheeks, but they weren't tears of anxiety or fear. They were tears of validation. The agonizing headaches, the terrified studying, the 10 months of grueling physical training, it had all been worth it. He looked down at his gloved hands. He wasn't a monster. He wasn't a villain waiting to happen. He was Izuku Midoriya. And he was going to save them all.